We're Jeff and Shaunti Feldhahn. Thanks for joining us for this series. We're looking forward to tackling some fun and important topics together. We have a lot to share with you, important truths we've discovered over the last 10 years as we've been researching how men and women think and what causes relationships to thrive. But before we start, we first want to share one important overall truth, some really good news about marriage and relationships. In our research with thousands of men and women and hundreds of marriage counselors, it's clear that much of the heartache and confusion or frustration we face doesn't have to be there.
In our time together, we'll be sharing some of the most important things you just don't know about the most important people in your life, primarily members of the opposite sex. The most intense application of this is in marriage, but this information also applies for dating relationships or in looking back on past relationships. It even applies to understanding kids or dynamics in the workplace. In this study, we'll be focusing on romantic relationships, but it affects everything.
So let's explain what this study is going to cover and how it works. We'll be sharing some vital information about men and women, those things we just don't get, but which affect us every single day.
This study is designed to be as flexible as possible for many different types of groups and uses, from couples Bible studies and small groups to Sunday school classes on marriage, to premarital counseling, to marriage mentoring or counseling. And as an important note, although we know not everyone will share our belief system, and the research was rigorous across the board, we'll be going through this study from a faith-based point of view. There are 6 overall sessions. Each session is broken down into 2 roughly 10-minute segments, one about understanding men and one about understanding women. These can be run together and viewed as one 20-minute session or broken into shorter chunks of 10 minutes each.
In each of the sessions, the first 10-minute segment will primarily be Shaunti talking to the women about men. Then the second 10 minutes will be both of us talking to the men about women. But it's important that both men and women hear both sides. We've different studies for 4 women only and 4 men only that are supposed to be separated out, but 4 couples only is based on our marriage conferences and is designed for men and women to view the sessions together.
Here's why that is so important. We've found in our research that every one of us comes to this topic with all these assumptions about the opposite sex. From the time we're kids, we develop ideas about how men are wired or women are wired, and we don't realize that some of these assumptions are wrong. And on top of that, we've built all these habits in how we interact with each other, how we respond to things the other person says, and so on.
It turns out most marriage problems don't come from the big ticket issues like alcoholism or sexual abuse. Those exist, but they're only the minority. Instead, usually most of us care about each other and we're trying hard to show that we care, but we don't realize that sometimes we're trying hard in the wrong areas. So our mate doesn't feel loved in the way we intended. Even worse, we may not realize that sometimes we're also hurting the other person in ways we never would have wanted to.
What we've found is that once we have the right knowledge, we can try hard in the right areas. We can avoid hurting each other and starting a downward spiral. So Jeff and I have identified a host of these high leverage factors, areas where small changes have a really big impact.
And that's why it's so important for men and women to hear both sides. Not just to learn what we need to learn, but also so we can realize what our mate simply didn't know. For example, before we started the research, I thought Shaunti knew how certain comments would make me feel, and she was choosing to drive me crazy. But as I learned more about women, I realized she really didn't know these things about me. That this shouldn't have surprised me, though, since I was painfully aware that there was so much I didn't know about her. But more on that later.
As you can probably tell, originally we stumbled over these truths, and we'll tell you that story in the first session. But once we did, we decided to investigate these surprises in a very systematic way.
Now, we've got a slightly different background. We're not marriage counselors or psychologists. We're analysts by training. Shaunti worked on Wall Street, and I'm an attorney who worked at one of those big New York law firms.
But that gave us a great background to do this research. Over the last 10 years, we have conducted interviews, focus groups, and surveys with more than 10,000 men and women, including 5 nationally representative surveys. We've even conducted 3 additional studies of teenagers. So what we're sharing with you isn't our opinion. That said, as we describe how men and women think, we are making generalizations, and there are always exceptions. If 75% of men said one way, by definition, 25% didn't. Everyone is an individual. Sometimes a couple will be flipped on certain issues. The key is to understand the person in your life.
And understanding this stuff, it's life-changing. We've seen amazing impacts, from marriages that have been restored to couples who suddenly realized, I had no idea how much I was hurting my spouse. And we've seen that once you know these things and decide to apply them, it can change everything.
We hope you will walk away from this study having your eyes opened to those simple, surprising truths about your mate that will make a big difference, and with a common language to talk about it with each other. But we have found that if even one person in the couple knows and does these things, it can have a great impact.
Ultimately, what we most want you to walk away with is hope. So, are you ready to get going? Let's dive into those important surprises that can make all the difference.
Men maybe play a good game sometimes, but we're just people. And so we have our own self-doubts. We have our own things about ourselves that maybe we don't like. And so there's always instances where a man can put on a good game, but really deep down on the inside, he knows, or he has some doubts of himself, of, am I really the best person? Am I really the best man?
For the most part, I think most men feel not so confident. Being a good father is a little complicated for me because, my son, been with him since he's been 2. I'm a stepfather, so my dad wasn't around for me. But it's challenging because I didn't have that guidance. Am I doing right? Am I doing wrong? So I kind of have to go by what he feels, what he says, how he reacts to me.
I will tell you that it's okay for a woman to be strong, and most strong men will appreciate that. The misconception I've found is that most women assume that all men or most men are strong because they're physically strong and they're meant to be the head of the home and lead and all the macho things. However, on the inside, a lot of men, most men have self-doubts. We have issues with confidence.
Latin culture as being more machismo. I think men in general are raised up that you're not supposed to show your feelings, or act out your feelings. Is it okay to talk about them? Absolutely not. Can I cry? No way. So it's hard to open up and let that let you feel weak. Like, hey, I'm sad. I feel love for you. Does it make me less of a man? Hopefully not. But again, if it's kind of built into you, like, don't do that. You're not supposed to do that.
When you get in an argument and then something hurtful is said, I would say my first reaction is get angry. But really, angry is just sadness turned inside out. I mean, it is because I'm so vulnerable to this woman that I love so much that, it's just like I want to be able to say to her, you can't say those things to me because really you're breaking my heart. I need your support. I need your affirmation. I need your respect because that's really what, what kind of gets me going every day.
Thanks for joining us. We're going to start by talking to the women about men, but men, don't go away. You're going to want to hear this too. First off, let's explain how we stumbled over this. When Jeff and I moved from New York City to Atlanta, I had the opportunity to write a couple of novels. And one of my main characters in this novel was a man. He was a good, decent husband and father and a successful businessman. That's the way I painted this main male character. And as a woman, you really realize how little you know about how men actually think when you have to write their thoughts. I couldn't just say what this male character was doing. I had to say what he was thinking. How do I know what a guy would be thinking in some pretty personal situations? And so initially, this whole thing started just because I started interviewing a few men. I'd ask Jeff, or we'd be out to dinner with another couple, and I'd say, okay, here's this scene in the book. What would you be thinking if this was you in this situation? And often, as these guys started telling me what they'd actually be thinking, I'm going, really? That's what you're thinking? And then I realized It wasn't just that it was surprising. What I was hearing was so foundational. It wasn't stuff that these men said that they thought or felt once every 3 months. These were things the men said that they thought or felt every single day, multiple times a day. And at that point, we'd been married about 8 years, and I'm thinking, why have I not heard this before?
And I was surprised that she was so surprised. She'd come home and tell me, guess what this guy told me about what he's thinking in this situation? And I'd think to myself, what about that didn't you get before? And I realized she just didn't know.
And as this turned into a giant research study, I not only did the research about men for women only, but together we did the research about women for men only. And I saw how men don't know these things either.
Not that I ever did any of these things.
Oh, no, never. We're talking about other men, of course. But let's just say it was very eye-opening for both of us, and I know it will be for you as well. For the rest of part 1 of this session, we're going to cover an important truth about men that really sets the stage for everything else. It turns out there is a great difference between how men look on the outside and how they feel about themselves on the inside. Men look so confident in themselves. In fact, we sometimes think he looks a little too confident in himself. He could be taken down a peg or two. But on the inside, men have a deep, hidden self-doubt and a vulnerability that we don't even know is there. The way the men described it, they feel like, I want to tackle a challenge. I want to do great things. I want to be a good husband, good father, good worker, or whatever. But I'm really not sure. I know exactly what I'm doing as a husband or a father or a worker, and I hope nobody finds out. Essentially, he's asking, do I measure up? And he's looking to the most important woman in his life for the answer to that question. Essentially, that self-doubt is a bit like a raw nerve, and it's painful, and we can hit that nerve without having any idea that that's what we're doing. I interview men everywhere I go. Heaven help, the poor man stuck next to me on the airplane for 2 hours. And I heard this everywhere, and I saw it on the surveys. Just a couple of weeks ago on the plane, I sat next to a CEO who had built this huge award-winning successful company. His employees loved working for him, but as we got talking about this, he said, yep, I'm always thinking someone's going to find me out, that I'm an imposter. Someone who can see what I'm really able to do is going to come into my big executive office and say, you don't belong here. You don't have any idea what you're doing. Even the most successful men say this is always in the back of their minds.
If I could just interject for a moment.
Sure.
Most guys don't feel like we always know what we're doing as a husband or a father either. We want to be a good husband. We want to be a great dad, but maybe we didn't have a great role model and there's no guidebook. So we just try to fake it. And we're desperately hoping that we can make our wife happy and that she thinks we're doing a good job, which is why we can be so sensitive when we think that she's saying we're not doing a good job.
As I talk to these men, I realize that we women don't see how often we hit that raw nerve and send a man's most painful signal. No, you don't measure up, and as a matter of fact, I think you're inadequate. We can hit this nerve a lot without realizing it and be so confused why he's upset. A man's private insecurity runs under the surface in many topics we will cover in this series together. So we need to know 2 main truths. 1, what hits that raw nerve, and 2, what we can do instead. First, what hits that nerve? Anything that he hears as I think you're inadequate. And often, it's not just what we say, but how we say it that does it. One man told me anytime a woman starts a sentence with, why did you, ... He said, in the man's mind, on the end of that sentence, just add a comma, you dodo. Like, why did you take the kids out so late at night, you dodo? I said, but that's not what we're saying. And he said, yeah, but that's what we're hearing. And I said, okay, you're gonna have to help me, because what do we say instead? If I need to ask why, I need to ask why. What do I say? And he looked at me as if the answer should be so obvious, like I had 2 heads or something. And he said, how different would it be if you said, I know you must have had a reason for that. Can you help me understand what it is? Same question, but it assumes you had a reason. I'm not there yet. Help me understand.
And again, that matters because inside he's feeling, I'm not entirely sure I know what I'm doing. And if so, instead of hearing a question, to him, it feels like an accusation.
The men told me it sounds like you're inadequate. You took the kids out late. You're a failure as a father, which you'd never want to say. Now, some of you may be thinking the same thing I was when I first heard this, which is, oh, please, that shouldn't bother him. And what I realized eventually is that I was saying that because it wouldn't bother me. But he's not me. He's wired very differently by a God who knew what he was doing. And what he's feeling has these huge consequences way beyond what I would have ever thought. For example, a man who feels inadequate often shuts down because he feels like it's not safe to open up and to try.
But a man who feels like his wife or girlfriend believes in him feels it's safe to try to be a good husband and a good father, even if he messes up occasionally. And he'll share more and be more open because he knows that you'll be accepting of those occasional mistakes instead of making him feel worse.
So the second truth we need to know is what we can do to help him open up instead. In one word, the answer is affirmation. If all this is true, it's not that men have an inflated view of themselves and need to be brought down to ground level. If this is true, they are starting below ground level, and we should be looking for every opportunity to build them up. So, in summary, learn what sends your man the signal that I think you're inadequate and avoid it. Instead of, why did you keep the kids out so late? Approach it like, I know you knew the kids have an early morning. I'm confused why you kept them out late. Sure, we'll sometimes disagree, but assume he wants to do the right thing and it's just a difference of opinion. And most important, find ways to affirm and appreciate him. If you think he's a great dad, tell him so. Brag about him to your friends, especially when he's listening. We'll be talking more about that in session 2, but just realize this type of affirmation will speak life into him in ways you never could imagine.